Chapter 13. The Clash of Masters. The heavy prison bay doors slid shut, locking out the sound of the blaring intruder alarms. The silence that followed was suffocating. Van slowly let go of Trogon's throat, allowing his unconscious body to slump heavily against the steel wall. The warlord turned his full attention to the intruder, his dark eyes narrowing as he evaluated the older warrior standing before him. "I know you," Van said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low rumble. "You are Storr, the rogue veteran of the Eastern Front. I thought you died in the outer sectors cycles ago." "I lived," Storr replied evenly, his grip steady on the hilts of his twin blades. "I lived to raise the boy that you tried to destroy." Before a single strike could be thrown, Storr raised one of his blades, tip pointed toward the ceiling in an ancient, sacred gesture. "Before our steel meets warlord, we will bind ourselves to the old laws. We make an oath." Van's lips curled into a grim, respected sneer. The ancient Manadiot blood oaths were absolute. To break one was to invite the wrath of the ancestors. "Speak your terms, old man." "If I fall this day," Storr declared, his eyes flashing toward where Jake, Robert, and a weeping Ruth were huddled over Ralph's bleeding body, "you will allow my son and his companions to leave this place unhindered. You will let them escape to my ship, hidden behind the mountains closest to the mines. You will give them your word that your guards will not pursue." Van stayed silent for a long moment, his eyes drifting over to Ruth. He could see the terror in her eyes, but more importantly, he saw the vessel of his future. He stepped forward, his heavy boots clicking against the deck plates. "I accept your terms," Van replied, his voice echoing with authority. "But a blood oath demands a counterterm. If I fall by your blade today, you will swear to me that you will not kill my unborn child. You will let the woman live, and you will protect my legacy." Storr looked at the warlord, a cold, hard look settling over his weathered face. The memory of the slaughter right here on Clison flashed through his mind, the day Lax Moon was murdered, and a grieving mother was cut down without mercy. "That is not something I would do," Storr said, his voice cutting through the room like a shard of ice. "I will not kill a woman while she is weeping over her lover's body." The words struck Van like a physical blow. The specific, brutal reminder of how he had callously executed Trogon's mother, causing the warlord's face to contort into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. But the oath was set. The terms were struck. "To the death," Van snarled. "To the death," Storr echoed. What followed was a masterclass in violence. The two titans collided in the center of the prison bay with a deafening clang of metal that sent sparks raining down onto the iron floor. It was a brutal, dizzying blur of red and brown cloth. Van fought with a savage, overpowering aggression, driving his weight forward with every heavy swing of his twin blades. But Storr was a master of the defensive arts. He moved with a seasoned, fluid grace, parrying Van's ferocious strikes with perfect timing, using the warlord's momentum to pivot and counter. Minutes that felt like hours, the battle raged across the claustrophobic room. Steel bit against steel. Storr spun beneath a lethal horizontal slash that cleaved a nearby cell console in half, coming up quickly to slice a deep gash across Van's armored shoulder. Blue blood sprayed against the wall. Van roared in anger, reversing his grip and unleashing a blinding fury of thrusts that forced Storr back toward the heavy bulkhead. They were both perfectly matched, two of the most elite warriors' minds the Manadiet race had ever produced. But time was a luxury Storr did not have. Decades of exile and age began to take their toll against Van's unyielding strength. Storr parried a vicious downward strike, but the sheer force of Van's weight caused the old warrior's knees to buckle slightly. Sensing the lapse in defense, Van didn't hesitate. He swept his foot inward, shattering Storr's balance, and in the same fluid motion drove his right blade upward. The sound of metal-piercing armor and flesh was sickeningly quiet. Storr froze, his breath catching in his throat as Van's blade buried itself deep into his chest cavity. "No!" Robert yelled out, in pure horror from across the room. But Storr didn't look back. With the last ounce of his fading strength, Storr gripped Van's forearms, pinning the warlord in place for just a moment, locking eyes with the tyrant through a haze of sudden pain. "The oath," Storr whispered, blue blood spilling past his lips. "It is bound." Van stared back at him, the fury in his eyes fading into a grim, solemn nod of respect for a fallen warrior. "It is bound. Your son will live." Van violently ripped his blade free. Storr crumpled to the deck plates, his twin weapons clattering against the metal as the light in his eyes slowly went dark. "Van." As I removed my blade from Storr's lifeless body, the heavy pressure doors of the prison bay opened once more. Stepping through the threshold was Bartar, flanked by 3 heavily armed guards. The healer stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes scanning the carnage left in the room. Even for a seasoned veteran of our world, the blood and the violence filling this small cell block was too much to bear. But it wasn't the dead bodies that hung heavy in the air. It was the cries coming from Ruth. Hearing the raw, agonizing sound was, for the first time in my life, difficult to endure. It struck an anomalous chord deep within my chest. I wiped the blue blood from my blade and sheathed it, turning my cold gaze to the reinforcement squad. "Guards," I commanded, my voice echoing, "take the bodies of the prisoners and escort these 3 men to their ship." A look of profound confusion rested on the soldiers' faces. They looked at the dead royal guards. They looked at the bleeding human, and then they looked at me. To them, this was treason against the Empire. "Do as I command," I snarled, stepping toward them. They immediately bowed their heads, terrified to question me further. I turned, pointing a gauntleted finger toward the older human, who was currently holding Ruth. "You there? You heard what Storr said before he died? You know where the vessel is hidden? You will help them find the ship." Before I could even finish my sentence, Ruth violently broke free from his grip. With a face completely flooded with tears and distorted by grief, she charged directly at me. She threw her small, fragile fists against my armored chest plates, striking me repeatedly. "I am not going with you. You are a killer. You are a horrible man." She paused, gasping for air, as her chest heaved violently. The sheer weight of her trauma caught up to her, and her voice dropped so low I could barely make out the words slipping past her trembling lips. You hurt me." A strange, suffocating sensation gripped my throat. I looked down at her small form, and before I could even formulate a thought to try and comfort her, Bartar moved swiftly. The healer stepped up directly behind her, with a specialized medical syringe hidden in his palm, and injected a fast-acting sleeping agent into the right side of her neck. Although Bartar was a small man compared to the rest of our warriors, he possessed a quiet, undeniable strength. Ruth's eyes fluttered, her small fists going limp against my armor as her consciousness faded. Bartar caught her before she could hit the cold metal floor. "I will take her to your quarters, Lord Van," Bartar said quietly, his voice steady as he lifted her up to safely remove her from the cell and carry her away. I gave him a silent nod with my approval. The guards quickly moved in, hoisting the unconscious Trogon and the bodies of Ralph and Storr out of the cell block under my personal seal of protection. The two other humans followed closely behind, their eyes filled with a mixture of terror and profound grief. Once the heavy doors shut, leaving me entirely alone, I looked around at the empty room. There were no more bodies. There was only the quiet wailing of the ship's sirens and the thick, contrasting pools of blood drying on the deck plates, human crimson and Manadiet blue mixing in the dark. In that quiet, bloody room, I somehow managed to see my future. The oath was bound. The old world was dying, and a new one was being forged in the stars. From this day forward, I will have to fight with everything I have to protect what is mine, my empire, my son, my legacy. As I made my way down the long, vibrating corridor toward the bridge, I decided to stop by the primary medical bay to speak with Bartar. The moment the pressurized doors hissed open, I walked straight into a room of chaos. The emergency lights cast a frantic glow over the chamber as Bartar rushed from table to table, checking on the influx of my injured garrison men who had been brought in from the courtyard blast. "Bartar, a moment of your time," I said, my voice cutting through the clinical chime of the vitals monitors as I motioned him toward me. Bartar calmly placed his medical data pad down on a steel tray and walked toward me, his posture entirely unbothered by my presence. "Yes, Lord Van," he said dutifully. I looked down at the healer, a sudden weight settling in my chest. "I know I am not the leader you prefer. You served for many years under the royal household of Lao Moon, and even with the sudden demise of their house, you still decided to remain on this vessel and serve me, and—" Bartar interrupted me, his voice sharp and steady. "I do not serve you, Lord Van. I serve the leader of the Krigere sect. The Dolgun do not serve mere men. We are servants to our position and our sacred duty," he said firmly, standing his ground. I narrowed my eyes, tracking his rigid posture. "This is true, Bartar." I noticed that one of the slain men on the floor in the prisoner bay was Storr Beskiter, Bartar continued, his piercing eyes watching my every movement, calculating my reactions. "I assume the young Manadiet with the blade wound in his thigh was Trogon, the missing heir of the Lao Moons." He paused for a moment, a ghost of a memory passing over his weathered face. "I was with his mother when she delivered him. He had a strong cry." With those words, a cold alert triggered my mind. I wondered exactly where this conversation was going. Was he openly questioning my position? Was he testing the waters of rebellion now that a true heir had surfaced? "Bartar," I said, taking a slow, heavy step closer to him. "Do I have your loyalty?" The healer let out a long, deep sigh. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he deliberately turned his back to me, walked away to return to the medical table. He picked up his data pad, resuming his work as if I were nothing more than a passing ghost in his ward. "I am loyal to Ruth," he said quietly, his back still turned as he began to scan the chest of an unconscious, bleeding soldier. "And to your unborn child," he added. I stood in the doorway, staring at the old healer as the monitors beeped rhythmically around us. It wasn't the submission I demanded from my soldiers. It wasn't the obedience I extracted from my engineers. But in a galaxy full of shifting political sands and hidden daggers, a man who was fiercely loyal to my bloodline was a rare asset.